Crime Story.
Fred and Maria Manning, murderous spouses. Marriage has always been a complex institution. Even in modern times, and in the Victorian era, it was particularly challenging due to the legal dynamics that often rendered wives subservient to their husbands. This legal framework had significant implications, including the fact that if a spouse committed murder, the wife was often deemed as complicit in the crime, sharing the guilt of her husband. In such a predicament, a wife was, in fact, expected to assist her husband in concealing the act of murder. It wasn't until 1828 that the law started to show some leniency, and wives were no longer subjected to as severe punishments. However, if it could be proven that the wife had any involvement in plotting the murder, she would be held equally accountable for the crime, alongside her husband. This legal aspect became a pivotal point in Mary Manning's destiny when she and her husband, Fred, found themselves as defendants in a high-profile murder case known as the Bermondsey Horror. Fred, born in approximately 1819 in Taunton, a town located in Somerset, southeastern England, Frederick George Manning was the eldest son of a local militia sergeant who initially worked as a toll collector and later managed the Bear Pub in Taunton. Fred, as he was commonly known, pursued a career in the railway industry. Showing promise in his work, he was eventually transferred to London, where he secured a position as a guard with the Great Western Railway. In 1845, a couple of years before he crossed paths with Mary, Fred's father passed away, bequeathing the majority of his estate to Fred's mother. Alongside this inheritance, Fred also received a substantial sum of £400. Marie LaRue, born under this name, arrived in the world in 1821 in Lausanne, Switzerland. Tragedy struck in the 1840s when her parents passed away, compelling her to seek employment as a governess in England. Upon her relocation to Devon, she decided to change her name to Maria, a modification aimed at facilitating her quest for employment. Subsequent biographers, with Robert Hewish, a prominent writer who devoted an entire book to the family, being one of the most notable, have recognized the scarcity of detailed information regarding her early years. Accounts from the few individuals who knew Maria in Lausanne suggest that her parents were devout Catholics, considering sending her to a convent due to her association in her youth with a certain Montano, a criminal figure who nearly led her astray from the path of righteousness. According to Hewish's account, Maria served as a maid for a period under an Irish couple by the name of Wentworth, and there appeared to be a close relationship, particularly with Mr. Wentworth. Some even went as far as to claim that Maria's behavior played a role in the untimely demise of her religious parents, who could not bear to witness their daughter's perceived moral decline. Life in England. Maria's initial arrival in England can be traced back to 1843 when she settled in Devon. At the age of approximately 22, she secured a position as a housemaid in the household of Lady Anne Polk, the wife of MP Lawrence Polk. Around this time, Maria crossed paths with Patrick O'Connor, an Irish immigrant hailing from Tipperary. Patrick, an unscrupulous customs inspector deeply entrenched in smuggling activities and usury, despite being 2 decades her senior, became Maria's paramour, and their liaison persisted for the next 6 to 7 years. However, some accounts suggest that their encounter occurred in 1846, following Lady Polk's demise, when Maria entered the service of Lady Blantyre. Supposedly, Patrick was en route to France for a vacation, and Maria chanced upon him during an errand, leading to an immediate affair. Meanwhile, Fred entered the picture around 1845, first encountering Maria while she and Lady Polk were traveling in a horse-drawn carriage along the Great Western Line. Maria found herself torn between her suitors, dating both men. Upon her transfer to work for Lady Blantyre, she took up residence at Stafford House in West London. At the time, this residence was renowned as one of the grandest in the capital, and the Duke of Sutherland, Lady Blantyre's father, resided there. It's worth noting that Queen Victoria was a frequent visitor to Stafford House, affording Maria glimpses into the opulent lives of the British Empire's wealthiest individuals. Patrick and Fred both boasted to their acquaintances about their intended visits to Mary at Stafford House, even though these visits were confined to the servants' quarters. The wedding? Mary's later published letters to Patrick reveal her disappointment over his reluctance to propose marriage to her. It is conceivable that this disappointment led her to readily accept a marriage proposal from Fred in 1847, possibly as an act of retaliation. Manning appeared to have won her over, at least in part, by painting a promising picture of his prospects, including an impending inheritance from her mother, although the extent of these prospects may have been embellished. Whatever the motivating factor, Mary agreed to the proposal, and the couple exchanged vows at St. James's Church in Piccadilly. Among the attendees was Fred's close friend, Henry Poole, a fellow security guard, who would later assume a significant role in the lives of the newlyweds. Notably, Patrick was absent from the wedding. Although he penned a letter to Mary a few days later expressing his undying love and indicating his intent to propose to her, only to discover that she had married Fred, a perceived act of betrayal. Life together. The newly established Mannings family initially had a plan for Mary to continue her employment for a time and retire once she and Fred had settled on a place to call home. However, their plans took an unexpected turn when Fred was unexpectedly terminated from his position at the Great Western Railroad, casting a shadow over their aspirations. The reasons behind Fred's dismissal remained officially undisclosed, although later information hinted at his involvement in a robbery. Nevertheless, due to a lack of substantial evidence against him, he was asked to leave his job. With the family's patriarch out of work, the couple found themselves at a crossroads, contemplating their next steps. Fortuitously, Fred's mother passed away during this period, bequeathing a significant portion of her estate to her eldest son. Armed with this inheritance, their accumulated savings, and a parting gift from Maria's employer, the couple made the decision to return to Fred's hometown and purchase a charming establishment known as the White Deer Hotel in Taunton. Their life in Taunton marked the beginning of a somewhat troubled married life. While there were rumors circulating about Maria visiting Patrick on multiple occasions and Fred becoming closely associated with 2 or 3 unmarried local women from Taunton, the veracity of these rumors remained uncertain. Nonetheless, the couple, for the most part, managed to stay together despite these whispered speculations. Robbery. The beginning of the end for the Mannings couple, whose lives were already marked by troubles, occurred on New Year's Day in 1849, on a train of the Great Western Railroad, where Fred had previously been employed. A daring theft took place when someone infiltrated the mail car and made off with the contents of all the mail sacks, which included a substantial amount of valuables and cash, resulting in a total loss of approximately £4,000. To put this into context, it's worth noting that at that time, a mere £100 could provide for a comfortable year of living expenses. The culprits behind this audacious crime remained elusive, and they might have escaped justice had they not repeated their audacious act the following day. This time, the criminals targeted a train moving in the opposite direction. But their luck took a turn for the worse. They encountered a vigilant security guard who, upon discovering the theft, swiftly deduced that the mail carriage could only be accessed from a first-class compartment. Disregarding complaints, he ordered a comprehensive search of all passengers, without exception. In one of these compartments, the search uncovered a stash of stolen items, masks, and burglary tools. With such damning evidence in hand, the passengers were apprehended and charged with both robberies. The first suspect was identified as Edward Nightingale, and the second as Henry Poole, who happened to be Fred Manning's closest friend. The newspapers seized upon this robbery story with great enthusiasm, racing to uncover every detail and publish them in full. It was during this media frenzy that reporters stumbled upon the White Stag Hotel, and indirectly implicated the Mannings in the unfolding drama. It emerged that the criminals planning the robbery had stayed at the Mannings Hotel on multiple occasions, which raised suspicions among the police about potential involvement by the Mannings. Furthermore, the alias Nightingale had been used by one of the culprits, who also had interactions using Fred's name. However, the police could not substantiate Fred's role as an informant for the robbers, leading to the dropping of all charges against the Mannings. Just as Fred and Mary were beginning to breathe a sigh of relief, a new rumor began circulating. one that enthralled the newspapers as much as the robbery itself. Media outlets started echoing the narrative that authorities had been forewarned about the impending robbery by an anonymous source, with implicit suggestions pointing to Maria. The rumor insinuated that Maria had intentionally tipped off the police about Fred's involvement as a form of retribution for his infidelity. The incongruity of this rumor with the location and circumstances of the criminal's arrest was disregarded. The reputation of the once respectable White Stag Hotel plummeted swiftly, and patrons began to avoid it due to its connections to the criminal underworld. Consequently, the Mannings found themselves compelled to sell the hotel and return to London. Returning to the capital, the situation unfolding in Taunton only served to further estrange Maria and Fred, exacerbating the visible fault lines in their marriage. Upon their relocation to London, the Mannings purchased the King John's Head pub situated on Kingsland Road. But unfortunately, the business did not prosper, ultimately compelling them to part with it. Eventually, they acquired a residence on Minver Place in Bermondsey. Mary secured employment as a dressmaker, and to make ends meet, they decided to rent out some of their rooms. Among their lodgers was a medical student by the name of William Massey, whose work piqued an unsettling interest in Fred Manning. During this period, Fred grappled with deep depression, unemployment, and alcohol abuse. He began posing a series of peculiar questions to William, such as inquiries about the effects of chloroform and other substances on the human body, or whether an individual under the influence of potent drugs could sign a check. These conversations so deeply alarmed and unnerved William that he promptly made arrangements to vacate the premises. Simultaneously, Mary's contempt for her husband grew, and she ceased concealing her ongoing affair with Patrick, devoting more time to him than her spouse. Fred, incensed by his wife's actions and her lover, harbored a desire to put an end to the situation. Disappearance. On Friday, August 10, 1849, Patrick O'Connor's absence from his job at the London docks raised concern among his colleagues. This was out of character for Patrick, as despite his criminal inclinations, he had always been exceptionally punctual and diligent, which had made apprehending him quite challenging. When he failed to appear for work the following day, one of his co-workers, William Flynn, who was not only a colleague but also a cousin of Patrick, became increasingly worried. William decided to visit O'Connor's apartment to inquire about his whereabouts. On his way to Patrick's place, William unexpectedly encountered two friends who disclosed that they had last seen Patrick on Thursday, where he mentioned being invited to dinner by a person named Marie. Upon reaching Patrick's apartment late that night, Flynn discovered it securely locked. After conversing with the landlady, he learned that she hadn't seen O'Connor since Thursday. However, she mentioned observing Marie Manning visiting Patrick's apartment on both Thursday and Friday evenings. This raised further concerns for William, prompting him to decide that it was time to seek assistance from the police and initiate a search for Patrick. The constables undertook the task with great diligence, and their primary focus was on locating the Mannings. However, it proved quite challenging until the following day when they finally located Maria at her residence. She admitted to extending an invitation to Patrick for dinner, but explained that he hadn't turned up. Anxious about his well-being, she attempted to visit O'Connor on Thursday and Friday but failed to find him at home on both occasions. The police then inquired about Fred Manning. Maria explained that they had spent most of their time together and that on both Thursday and Friday nights, Fred had been at church. The constables found themselves at an impasse, lacking clear evidence pointing to the Mannings. However, William Flynn was not one to easily give up. The following day, he made another visit to Maria. While her story remained consistent, something in her tone struck him as amiss. William became increasingly convinced that something terrible had befallen his cousin, and that Marie may have played a part in it. Consequently, he made the decision to hire a boy to keep a close watch on her residence. For the rest of the day, William distributed flyers offering a reward of £10 for any information regarding Patrick O'Connor. He planned to visit his brother's apartment the following Monday to search for potential clues. On August 13th, accompanied by the landlady, William conducted a thorough search of O'Connor's quarters and discovered that the securities and cash he knew Patrick kept in a cupboard were conspicuously absent. As concern grew, it was further confirmed on Tuesday when a boy hired by William to watch Maria's house reported that early in the morning, she had surreptitiously departed the residence while carrying a large piece of luggage. By evening, she had not returned, and William promptly notified the police. As a result, the Mannings were officially reported as missing persons. The police maintained surveillance on the Minber Place residence for approximately 24 hours, but their sole visitor turned out to be an individual who had recently made purchases from Manning and had come to collect them, only to find that Fred never arrived at the agreed time. Recognizing the futility of waiting any longer, the constables decided to enter the house on Thursday. Their initial search yielded no results, and they even dug into the backyard, but the ground was devoid of any clues. On Friday, the police embarked on a second search, during which they observed an unusual cleanliness about the kitchen stoves. This prompted them to lift the stoves, revealing fresh mortar underneath. It became apparent to the police that they were on the right path, and they continued their excavation. Approximately half a meter underground, they unearthed the lifeless body of Patrick O'Connor, naked and liberally covered with quicklime. The precise events within the Minber Place house on the evening of August 9th remained shrouded in mystery. However, one certainty emerged: Patrick had been shot in the back of the head. The weapon responsible was a shotgun with a low powder charge. Additional injuries on Patrick's body indicated that the gunshot did not prove fatal, and someone, possibly using a poker, had completed the gruesome act. Subsequently, Fred would accuse his wife, while Mary would point fingers at her husband. Although doubt lingered, it was evident that they had both participated in the burial. In Maria's footsteps, Fred fled on the same day, while Maria remained in the Minber Place house, concealing her lover's lifeless body beneath the kitchen floor for an additional 5 days. During this period, she busied herself with packing and looting Patrick's apartment. Simultaneously, the news of the case quickly caught the attention of the press, sparking significant interest. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the circumstances, the media chose to focus primarily on Maria, labeling her as the mastermind behind the murder. Such narratives tended to captivate readers more when women were depicted as the perpetrators of crime. Soon, the newspapers regaled the public with tales that portrayed Maria as a bold and scheming woman who had long schemed to eliminate her lover purely for financial gain, allegedly coercing her timid husband into acquiescing to the crime. Furthermore, Maria remained at the forefront of the police investigation, albeit for a different reason: her traceability. Witnesses had spotted her at London Bridge Station, where she had left several boxes in a locker. These boxes contained blood-stained clothing, select documents from O'Connor's apartment, and correspondence between Patrick and Maria. It was revealed that Maria had ventured to Edinburgh and leased an apartment there, in her bid to dispose of the stolen shares from Patrick's apartment before fleeing the country. She found herself in an unfortunate predicament. William Flynn had preemptively telegraphed news of the pilfered shares, and the stockbrokers she approached promptly alerted the authorities. By the time the London police managed to trace her to Euston Station, the Edinburgh police had already arrived at Maria's apartment and commenced her arrest. She had been on the run for only a week, but it took an additional 3 days to extradite her to London, given the distinct legal system that Scotland had at that time. Searching for Fred. Tracing Fred's whereabouts proved to be a far more challenging endeavor. After selling some furniture at a meager price, he made his way to Waterloo Station, effectively evading immediate detection. Unlike Maria, Fred lacked distinctive physical characteristics. Standing at 5 feet 8 inches, with blonde hair and a ruddy complexion, there was little to set him apart. The police disseminated his description, leading to an inundation of reports from various regions across the country. It wasn't until August 28th, nearly 2 weeks into the search, that a promising lead emerged. It came to light that in March 1849, Fred had stayed at a boarding house in Guernsey, where he had met the sister of the establishment's owner. On August 20th, this woman encountered Fred aboard a steamer, but he feigned ignorance of her. At that moment, she remained unaware of the murder and didn't dwell on Fred's peculiar behavior until disembarking and reading a notice about his being sought in the newspaper. The ship's final destination was Jersey, where Fred lay in hiding. Although he initially had intentions of fleeing to France, he ended up succumbing to uncontrolled drinking. The police finally caught up with him in Jersey, a process that took several days as Fred, even while appearing intoxicated, managed to skillfully evade pursuit once he realized he was wanted. His arrest eventually transpired on the night of August 30th, extending his time at large by 9 days beyond that of his wife. The inquest. In the initial week of her arrest, Mary chose to remain silent, while Fred took an entirely different approach, wasting no time in laying the groundwork for his defense. One of his initial actions was to inquire about his wife's arrest, and upon learning that she was in custody, he displayed an unusual sense of elation. Fred's version of events centered on framing Mary as the murderer while asserting his own complete innocence. This narrative might have seemed implausible, particularly since it was clear that Mary alone would have been incapable of lifting the kitchen stoves. But such considerations did not appear to trouble Fred. In a broader sense, the detectives found Fred's loquaciousness to be a positive development, as they recognized that when the Mannings eventually faced each other in court, their accounts were likely to expose contradictions and inconsistencies. The press, in their sensationalized coverage of the court case involving the Mannings couple, dubbed it the Bermondsey Horror. Naturally, the majority of the media's scrutiny was directed at Maria. She was an attractive foreigner who had once served in prestigious households, circulating in high society, and her life story seemed tailor-made for crafting attention-grabbing headlines. However, there was one aspect of her demeanor that drew the ire of both the public and the press, which didn't hesitate to label it as the most grievous sin. Unlike her husband, Maria exhibited a remarkable level of composure and calmness, qualities that the media characterized as cold and calculating. The newspaper's animosity towards Mary reached such heights that they even propagated the myth that she was responsible for English ladies eschewing black satin, a fabric of her preference. The first reliable witness that the police located was William Massey, a former tenant of the Mannings, who provided a wealth of intriguing information. In addition to the peculiar inquiries made by Fred, he mentioned that the Mannings had once informed him that Patrick O'Connor had drafted a will in which he left almost all of his assets to Maria. Crucial evidence also came to light, with the most significant being a shovel and lime that the Mannings had purchased a few weeks before the murder. Consequently, by the time the inquest concluded, the case appeared to be all but a foregone conclusion. For the prosecutor, the primary challenge lay in establishing collusion between the parties. This was because the law enacted in 1828, which provided greater legal protection for married women, actually worked in Mary's favor. Under this law, a wife could not be charged with complicity in a murder committed by her husband, as it was assumed that there was no concrete evidence against her. Thus, the prosecutor's task revolved around proving to the court that Maria either possessed foreknowledge of the impending crime, played a direct role in the murder, or acted independently with the intent of profiting from O'Connor's death. The entire trial hinged on determining her degree of involvement in the crime. The trial transpired at the Old Bailey, with Mary represented by attorney William Ballantyne and Fred by Charles Wilkins. Ballantyne made earnest efforts to secure a separate trial for Mary, emphasizing her status as a foreigner and her entitlement to be judged by a jury comprising half English citizens and half foreigners. In contrast, Fred would be subject to trial by an English jury exclusively. This stratagem aimed to achieve a separate trial and potentially afford Mary a slim chance. However, the court did not accede to this request, asserting that Mary's marriage rendered her a citizen of England. Consequently, they were both tried together. The trial of the Mannings could not be characterized as lengthy or arduous. Key evidence against Mary encompassed bloodstains discovered on her dress, and the confirmation of her identity by the clerk at the hardware store where she procured lime. Fred's culpability was largely taken for granted, and his name featured less prominently in the courtroom. Although Fred's lawyer valiantly defended him, he faced an exceedingly challenging task. On Mary's part, her lawyer attempted to capitalize on an intriguing moment in her defense, asserting that the time gap between the last sighting of Patrick alive and Mary's arrival at his apartment was too short. This suggested the possibility that she was not present at home during the murder. Conversely, the prosecution contended that O'Connor could have been killed after Mary's return, an argument that appeared to resonate with the jury, as they rendered a guilty verdict for Fred and Maria after just 45 minutes of deliberation. It was customary, prior to sentencing, to offer the prisoners an opportunity to make a statement. Fred remained silent, undergoing a transformation of sorts, while Mary also underwent a profound change, shedding her facade of composure. She vehemently declared, "There is no justice or fairness for a foreigner in this country." As the allocated time for their final words expired, and the judge was poised to deliver the death sentence, Maria continued to protest the injustice and assert her innocence with great fervor. Upon being led away, she became hysterical, momentarily breaking free from the grasp of the guards, a stark contrast to her unflinching demeanor during the trial. On the journey to the prison, Maria's mood oscillated to one of cheerfulness, only to give way to grief and tears upon her return to her cell. Attempted release. Following the trial's conclusion, the newspapers indulged in speculation, weaving narratives and filling in the gaps in the case. Almost unanimously, they arrived at the unfounded conclusion that the true mastermind behind the crime was Maria. According to their narratives, she had meticulously orchestrated the murder and the theft of documents, while her husband was portrayed as almost innocent due to his alleged weakness. Despite the press's conjecture, Maria was the sole member of the Mannings to lodge an appeal. During this process, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a rumor suggesting that her marriage to Fred might constitute bigamy, with allegations that he had been previously wed. Such a revelation could potentially have paved the way for a separate trial for Maria. Regrettably for her, this information remained unsubstantiated. The Court of Appeal ultimately affirmed Mary's guilt, thus confirming that the execution would proceed as scheduled. In a desperate bid to evade her impending fate, the former maid implored her former noble employers to seek clemency from the Queen. Regrettably, all of her letters were returned unopened, leaving her without recourse. Execution. On the morning preceding her execution, Mary made a suicide attempt, which was promptly foiled by vigilant guards. Her impending death was treated as a macabre form of public entertainment of the highest order, drawing crowds numbering in the thousands. Among the spectators at the execution was Charles Dickens, who attended not to witness the Mannings' demise but to observe the eager throngs seeking the spectacle. He later penned these words, "Thousands and thousands of faces turned toward them, so unspeakably hideous in their bestial gaiety and callousness that I had reason to be ashamed of my appearance and recoil from myself as being made in the image of the devil." What transpired was even more distressing. At the height of the event, the crowd grew so frenzied that a stampede occurred, resulting in the death of one woman and serious injuries to two men. During that era, it was customary to bury executed individuals in graves within the prison grounds, the bases of which were treated with quicklime to deter foul odors. It emerged that the Mannings were interred under nearly identical conditions as those in which they had left Patrick O'Connor, a final ironic twist in the saga of this undoubtedly bloodthirsty marriage. I hope you liked this story. Please don't forget to leave a comment sharing with your thoughts below. Give a thumbs up this video, and remember to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more captivating stories. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey, and we'll see you in the next video.